Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks. It has been a busy day here at Rogue. First, I was on. This is my third podcast of the day. First, this morning I was on with Tradcat Knight, Eric and Juski. I was on his show. Then CJ and I did a show. Then we had Bix, and now we have Mathew Ehret, the man of the hour. You can get his link right there in the description box. Matt is the man. He is a brilliant geostrategic, geoeconomic mind. So I'm glad to have him on. There's lots going on. Matt, where do you want to begin, bro? I mean, we have the election fraud, the swindle of the deep state going on right here, right now, as the cabal is trying to hold on to their dirts of power. We have situations in the Middle East. We have the Caucasus with Azerbaijan and Armenia. We have, oh my God, RCEP, or RCEP as some would call it, is finally been signed. The world is reordering. Things are shifting. And you have the idiots from Davos, the degenerates from Davos saying, yeah, you will give up everything and you will be happy. I am Klaus Schwab. I am an Obergruppenführer, Klaus Schwab. You will give up everything and you will be happy.
Yeah, it's funny. It's like these guys are really, really unable to let go of an obsolete script. They're in total denial that the world is completely changing beyond their ability to exert the influence that they used to enjoy, and they can't accept that. And so they're just parroting the same sorts of stuff that they were parroting in the 90s, in the 80s, and the 70s, when they actually had a little bit more of that godlike sense of empowerment, that anything they wanted that they could just achieve with the snap of a finger. If you wanted a government overthrown, or you wanted an economic, effect to happen, you could just do it, and your will became reality so quickly. And all of a sudden, things stopped working that way, and they're just pitifully just holding on. It's really quite something.
You have in your country, Mathew of Canada, you have the boy wonder prime minister himself, the flamboyant drama teacher, part-time ski instructor who is now a prime minister, Justin Trudeau himself. He has come forward and said that, we have to do the Great Reset. Can you break down, and you do it so well, breaking down the Great Reset and the nonsense from the degenerates in Davos, man? Go for it.
You want to start with that? We can start with that. Yeah.
We can start with that.
I feel like people are so flooded with the election debacle, and the news cycle is it's so flooded every second with more information on the vote fraud, on the coup d'etat underway in the United States. We can talk about that later, but yeah, let's enter it this way. I like that. And I was thinking to myself, what would be a nice way to possibly address this? And a lot of your viewers probably know of the name of Maurice Strong. He's sort of like the prototypical Davos man. Before there were Davos man, there was Maurice Strong, and very interesting figure as far as looking at his career, his life's experience from an early age all the way to his death in 2015, because he sort of embodies the problem very, very nicely, and it dovetails into the George Soros, Lord Malik Brown, British intelligence stuff that we're going to unpack in the course of this interview. But he said something around the time that he became a leading chair of the World Economic Forum. He gave an interview in 1992 where he says, hold on, where's this interview? He says, what if the, I lost it. Damn it. Okay. Well, basically I'll paraphrase it. So basically he gives an interview where he says, well, what if the world leaders were to come together and try to convince the nations of the world that they're overpopulated and that industrial civilization has caused all of our problems? Would the leaders agree to this deconstruction of their society in order to protect the environment? And his answer is, he rhetorically answers saying, these leaders realize that the nations would say no, they would never do it. And so isn't the best thing we could do to induce industrial civilization to collapse? Isn't that the best way to save humanity ultimately and the environment? And he acts like, he justifies this, saying later on that, oh yeah, that was just a fictional story I was thinking about coming up with. And it's like, no, if you actually look at this guy's entire life's commitments and policies, that's exactly what the story was. Because going back to the 1960s, after he was the youngest executive president of Power Corporation in the world, he was recruited earlier on to the Rockwell Foundation in the late 50s, from Canada, Canadian. We tend to produce some unfortunate characters.
Luminaries.
Yeah. But so he becomes immediately on the selection committee that picked Pierre Elliott Trudeau in Mont Blanc, Quebec. So when they were looking for a face to run their new Beatlemania propaganda campaign to impose a technocratic puppet leader, they were searching around, shopping around, and Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who had been a Fabian Society recruit back in the 50s and was running out of the Privy Council office, he was part of the extraction. There was a big operation called the Révolution Tranquille, the Quiet Revolution, in 1960, 61, 62, which was all designed to extract Christianity, the principles of Christianity from the Catholic governing system and culture of Quebec, which was a very Catholic Christian province back in those days. It was actually one of the biggest hotbeds politically to stop the teaching of eugenics and radical Darwinism into the schools. Sterilizations were still happening until the 70s based on eugenics principles. So there was a political force here that was also working with Charles de Gaulle in France for big projects and really just working to bring about a certain type of economic system that the Davos creatures hate, premised around sovereign nation states. So anyway, Pierre Elliott Trudeau is selected to be that guy after he does good work as part of that social engineering project, and he's then brought in from the Fabian Society of Canada that was the NDP into the Liberals, and he's then jettisoned to power, kind of like Obama, just a creature out of nothing, no experience. And Maurice Strong is part of the selection committee along with a few other people whose names doesn't matter. So immediately, Maurice Strong becomes the head of our foreign affairs office. He takes control of the foreign investments strategies, bans nuclear investments into Africa, like no high tech, and promotes the idea originally that the only type of investments developed countries should ever make to poor countries is appropriate technologies. Which, what does that mean? That means
it's terrible. Windmills and solar panels.
Yes, things that won't affect the indigenous natural ecosystems or culture of the backwards peoples wherever they are, because that's just their natural state of being.
It just shows you these neoliberal leftists are so racist, bro.
Oh, super racist.
Oh my god, same with the neocons as well.
But they all dovetail, right? And that's why you have this alliance in the United States around neoliberals and neocons all pushing the same anti-human war policy. But Maurice Strong is one of the early harbingers of this, and his point is, okay, we're going to give you money to Africa. We're going to give Pakistan money on the condition that they abide by IMF and World Bank conditionalities. So Canada, early on, under Pierre Elliott Trudeau, the father of Justin, was the thing that sort of brought these nations that wanted independence. They wanted development, like Kwame Nkrumah and Patrice Lumumba and others who were overthrown or assassinated throughout the 60s and 70s. They wanted real development, to stand on their own 2 feet, have full spectrum economies, and that was derailed. So Maurice Strong played a key role in that. He later on, when Trudeau became Pierre Elliott Trudeau became the prime minister under it's called Trudeau-mania because it was they took the Beatles, how they created the Beatles and artificially made them famous through like basically mass marketing and psyops by just like bussing in girls from schools into this, airfield that the Beatles were coming in for the first time from Europe, from Britain, on a contract with EMI like Records, which did business with the military industrial complex. So anyway, they come out of the airplane and these girls are told, yeah, just whoever comes out, just scream. And all of the media was there to take their picture and broadcast on the radio. And the girls were like, who are we screaming for? What's a Beatle? And they're like, oh, whatever, we're getting paid. Here, okay, there they are, scream. So they did that with Pierre Elliott Trudeau for the first time, I think, in a real political marketing strategy. Again, Trudeau-mania, all of a sudden he was like a sex figure. Women were wetting themselves to like get one of his napkins. It was weird. And anyway, we have a total technocratic imposition of Maurice Strong's program in the form of things like the Club of Rome of Canada that funded things like the limits to growth. So the limits to growth strategy, the first scientific study proving that mankind's biggest problem is his belief in technological progress. That was a study from MIT that was funded by Canadian money in 1970. So it was published in 1972. Pierre Elliott Trudeau and Maurice Strong were the original founders of the Club of Rome of Canada, and that funded this thing. And this was then used politically to justify what was already happening under the British Empire for hundreds of years, basically saying to colonies, technology is for the white man. You just stay the way you are, and we'll just take your resources while you're just walking 12 miles to get your water from a well. That's
Yeah, advancement. And here's a solar panel while you're at it.
Yeah. Go clean that for the next 5 years.
Yeah.
So it was really, like you said, it was racist. It was the transformation of the eugenics religion, and it was a religion, the science of trying to prove statistically why certain races and families and genetic stocks are superior than other ones who are born poor or whatever, which should then allow you to make policy to take evolution into human hands. That was sort of the idea. And when Hitler demonstrated how atrocious that was for the world, obviously that they had to change strategies. And like Julian Huxley says in his UNESCO document in 1946, the United Nations Education, Science, and Cultural Organization, he made it very clear that eugenics is still the most important of all social sciences, but due to the unfortunate developments around World War II, we have to change strategies and call it something else because, and what does he say? He says we have to learn how to make the unthinkable become thinkable, which will take time. And so things that we see that I was just talking about with the limits to growth is the expression, the choice, one of the several choices that they chose to take to change the costume, but get the same sort of effects. This is what I would say if you want to get at the heart of the Great Reset, which is essentially trying to combine COVID response, emergency response protocols, because now obviously they're saying, COVID is the cause of why our economy is collapsing. Ignore the fact, please, that the economy was already collapsing way before COVID. But no, they're saying that that's the trigger, and now we have to solve that problem. And while we're at it, let's unite it with this whole program to stop global warming and reduce global carbon emissions within 8-10 years or something to zero. So if you want to get at the heart, and that's what the Green New Deal is. That's been promoted now since really 2019-18, but it goes back to 2009 as a term Green New Deal. But if you want to get at the roots of the word, from the standpoint, you got to go to these Davos creatures, you got to go to the Davos Economic Forum, but you got to go to what Maury Strong was doing back then with limits to growth and that whole transformation of stopping the idea of John F. Kennedy, of real leaders who wanted to use the productive capabilities of America and the developed world of the rest of Europe and North America, and use those the productive capabilities to help other nations stand on their own 2 feet and develop full spectrum economy so that you could have honest business and you could help them in a real type of Christian love, right? Like if you really care about your soul and you care about your neighbor and you care about your children, you care about the future, you want them to live in a world that's not at war, where there's security and where there's prosperity, and it's common sense. It's self-interest, but it's not on that lower level. It's really tied to something higher. So that was what was rejected. They had to stop that, and this is what they created. So now we're at the final stages here. Now you and I talking, and your listeners listening, we're at the final stages where we're sort of in between 2 systems. You have the collapsing system, and like Maury Strong said in 1992, the collapse was built into the operating system of the post-1971 floating exchange rate consumer society model. It was always built in the creation of a system that would self-implode based on the fact that it was wired to just value momentary gains, right? So give people a lot of payback monetarily for thinking very short term. That means more speculation, more deregulation, and punish the types of thinking that would be long term, that would actually offer your society the fitness to survive. So export your manufacturing, get rid of the productive base, the industries, the agricultural sector, the small and medium enterprises that used to be the lifeblood of Western civilization. Export that to the laborers who would have to stay poor to be cheap labor, while the former productive economies would be just simply consumers, and their whole economies would be shifted to services, financial and otherwise. And increasingly, we just saw the ratio, since 1971 to the present, where formerly we had 40% of back in 1960 to 70, we had 40% of our workforce in manufacturing and productive engagements, productive enterprises. 40% more was in services, miscellaneous for the other 20%. And you could literally watch these lines, these statistics over 45 years completely invert to the point that we have hardly any manufacturing, which is something Donald Trump, that's why he was elected in 2016, because he actually was the only person in years who had a program and an intention to rebuild that lost manufacturing. And today we're entirely services where people have lost a sense of, well, how do you think about real value? What's the difference between a want and a need? To the point that we're even like measuring, we allow under this system that's imploding the way Maury Strong and George Soros and others knew it would. It was designed that way. You can't tell the difference between, the dollars associated with a purchase of heroin on the markets that go on to buy things in stores and they say is related to employment versus a dollar invested in a new high-speed rail network or there's no, a dollar is a dollar in this insane system. So it's going to collapse. Now we're in the middle point where what will come online to replace it is we don't know what that's going to be yet, but we see that there's a fight between paradigms. And we have those who created the fires who are saying, well, we got the solutions for you. The Great Reset crowd. They're saying, the solution to these fires is no fire, just get rid of fire and then you won't have fires. And yeah, okay, sure. That might be true. That's one form of way to get rid of fire. But then another way is to say, well, let's actually harness fire and use it for the benefit of mankind in mutual development. And that's where you get the multipolar alliance, which is really since 2013 represented something which scares the shit. Am I allowed to say shit?
Yes, you are. You're allowed to curse on this program.
Good. Okay. But it scares the hell shit out of the this oligarchy because it's premised around the sort of thing that John F. Kennedy or Franklin Roosevelt or Abraham Lincoln were trying to do. And it's something that's tied to, as we're seeing now with the Belt and Road Initiative. There's problems, obviously, everywhere. There's imperfections, but you have 135 nations working with a different financial architecture in Eurasia, mostly, but also in Africa and South America, which is tied to ensuring that the behavior of money and investment practices is tied to physical, economic, real development that has productivity justifying its existence. It's not just money coming out of thin air like on Wall Street.
Right.
So there's a race.
Remarkable.
It is. It's very important.
It's very important for people to understand the difference because when you're basing your currency on physical production, you take it away from the hands of the speculators. You take it away from the hands of the paper creators, the guys who are literally creating paper instruments created out of nothing that are so far removed from the underlying asset, and you're taking it into actual production, meaning if you want your currency to compete, your country has to make something. So now you're unshackling innovation, you're unshackling manufacturing, you're unshackling industry. And when you do that, and then you begin to engage in global trade, the entire world prospers. This is like when Matt said the first time he was on, this is the best chance we have on another chance in terms of having an open economic system, a modular system that we could all plug into that is fair, that is equitable, and that is mutually beneficial for all those that are at play. And these deviants from Davos with their Green New Deal is trying to put a stop to that. Yes.
And, like I was I was on an interview today and they were asking me about, how would Joe Biden respond to this multipolar alliance? The interviewer liked the multipolar alliance. And I was like, he was also of the view that Joe Biden had somehow won, and that's an indisputed fact. Whoa, just wait a minute there. Because if you actually get down to it, not only is that completely not true. If you believe mainstream media Kool-Aid and Justin Trudeau, yeah, sure, Joe Biden won. But if you actually look at the facts of reality of what's happening, and you listen to people like Sidney Powell, and you just look at the basic evidence that's been presented so far, and we're just scratching the surface. There's a very good chance that Trump is going to be able to successfully challenge these fraudulent results that have been pumped into our faces for 2 weeks. But between the two of them, yeah, I would say that very easily Trump is the only hope you have in America or in the world to get an honest dialogue, because these countries like Russia, China, Jesus, any of these countries who are working with this multipolar alliance. We just had the signing on just 2 days ago of the regional cooperation, regional economic cooperation partnership accords by the ASEAN nations, as well as several other nations. South Korea, Japan was on board with China and other countries around Belt and Road projects. It was basically a zone of economic development that's just been
$30 trillion worth of trade.
Oh,
$30 trillion with a T, folks. Unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is mostly tied to real processes of real world rail development, water management, other things that are real. So it's very, very interesting that this just happened. And they want to work with the West. The olive branch has been there open for years, saying Russia, China has been saying to the West, we want to work with you on these things. But the problem is for you to work in that model means that you as a nation need to be operating on the idea of your self-interest. Every nation is expected to care about their self-interest when they're making trade agreements that transcend both their boundaries, because a lot of these rail and water projects, like in Africa or Asia, they transcend multiple nations. They require the cooperation of many nations, having bilateral agreements, working together and on things that are going to ultimately benefit all of them. But you have to care about your self-interest. They're looking at a Europe and at a North America that has not operated in its own self-interest for many, many years. And so they cannot trust us to be a trustworthy partner in anything right now. So that has to change. If they can see that we're actually operating on a concern for our own well-being, then it's a different story. We can have an honest dialogue, and that would be good. So Trump is the first president, I can honestly say this, that I've seen, and this is before I was born, I haven't seen a real president. Robert F. Kennedy was maybe the closest. Reagan had moments when he came into this idea, but he was he had his Joe Biden problems, and dementia wise. But nonetheless, he's a human. I could see that there was a human being there, but we haven't had a president in America operating on that idea for a very long time until Trump. So the idea of, going back 1 year into the past, January 2020, George Soros, who plays figurative, like a very, very big role in the current coup attempt in America. He's played a big role in coup attempts.
And we got to get into that. I want to get into your Lord Malik Brown article.
Oh, we will. Yeah,
definitely.
We'll fold that right into that. This is, but yeah, George Soros, January 2020, freaked out. He gave a speech. I just read it. I'm going to write something on this actually, where he's basically saying the biggest threats to the world order and open society are, number one, Donald Trump's America, and number two, Xi Jinping's China. And he says this, he's explosively freaking out. And why is he saying this? Because at that moment, the U.S.-China trade deal had gone successfully through its first step of a $200 billion deal as starters. This is a multi-phase project, which has since been derailed, unfortunately. But for China to buy manufactured goods from the United States, because Donald Trump wants to rebuild the manufacturing base of America. If America is going to be able to have economic sovereignty that it hasn't had for a very long time, it needs to regain what it lost under NAFTA, under years of globalization, free trade accords that have just exported. It's basically put a prize on the lowest, whatever you can, the lowest price becomes the law, right? Buy low, sell dear. That became a religious doctrine. So obviously you can buy low, buy cheap products if you have cheap labor. And cheap labor you can only get if you have underdeveloped people who don't have access to electricity, or they have to have very low standards of living to support a laborer in Indonesia to feed your Walmarts, So this logic, this and it's almost a religion, destroyed America's industrial base, and Trump has been fighting to bring back protectionism by overthrowing NAFTA and putting nation states back into a driver's seat where nations can actually have a role to play in economic affairs, which NAFTA said no to. And so that was the right orientation. You need to have a purchaser because where's the market going to be for America's manufactured goods? America is currently an economic basket case. It's crippled. So to rebuild and heal, China is a vital component of that recipe. So the U.S.-China trade deal that Trump negotiated is vital. And George Soros, just looking at what makes these creatures so afraid, you got to know that that's what you should do more of. So in spite of the fact that within 2 months of that, Trump, who had formerly been a defender of Xi Jinping and overall pushing for, he took a hard line, but overall he was still maintaining a, U.S., China, Russia friendship policy. He admired Xi Jinping's ability to build high-speed rail. They got 30,000 kilometers of high-speed rail in China built in 10 years. In America, in the U.S., you have maybe 100 kilometers. Canada's got 0. So Trump is a builder, so he could respect that. Now under COVID, what we've had has been a rising of the Steve Bannon narrative that has become increasingly a dominant force among Trump supporters, and unfortunately, that became the China virus. It became the
Miles Gao and those guys.
The
Free Federalist State of China and that whole entire group, and
the CIA operation there. I mean, the Falun Gong that runs Epoch Times. I mean, that's a CIA cult operation that's been used as part of a color revolution in China. Keep in mind that that was the whole yellow umbrella revolution was Falun Gong that tried to destabilize China in 1997. That led to their being ousted. And the head of their organization, who believes he's like the Messiah who communicates with aliens from another dimension. It's like a Chinese version of Scientology. Is protected in the United States.
There's nothing new with the CIA. There really is nothing new with them. We need a cult-like thing, just like Scientology. What do we do? Oh yeah, we'll just Falun Gong. We'll do that.
Yeah, it's the art of creating cardboard cult leaders. It's it's really there's really a technique to this. Whether it's Charles Manson or whether it's Sung Myung Moon or whether it's Barack Obama, it's the same. It's the same thing. They're looking at the same personality profile.
It's the same thing. You got that right.
So, I mean, this is the thing. If you look at Steve Bannon, people are saying, oh, but he's doing such a good job right now in defending Trump and the presidency in opposition to the coup with his radio show and other things. And it's like, well, yeah, but is this legit? Because keep in mind, Steve Bannon not only worked with Falun Gong closely, but he also worked with George Soros through Falun Gong, because both George Soros, through the Freedom House operation that Soros runs, it's tied to Open Society, is a big supporter of Falun Gong, as is Steve Bannon. They're united in these things, which are all parts of the same anti-American, anti-China operation. It's anti-nation state, and it's anti-human is really what it is. So Steve Bannon, look at what he's done. Since Trump started picking up on what he actually was, calling for this whole clash of civilizations thing back in 2017, and fired him rightfully so. Steve Bannon has gone on to try to throw Roger Stone under the bus during the Mueller investigations, where he testified that Roger Stone, one of the most loyal figures and politicos to Donald Trump, was the keystone operative between the Kremlin and the Trump campaign.
You got to be kidding me. Wow. I did not know that.
Yeah. So he was actually he was complicit in the attempt to overthrow Trump by doing that, because there was never any fact whatsoever to either Roger Stone being a part of some Kremlin conspiracy or anybody in the Trump campaign for that matter. It was all make believe.
Why do you think he's out there presenting this whole nationalistic thing? Like he's a nationalist now and he's a populist. He wants the populace to win. What do you think that's all about? Is it controlled opposition? Is it Intel, COINTELPRO? What is it?
Go to Dignitas Humanitae Institute if you really want to get a sense of this thing. But you got to go to Dignitas Humanitae.
Can you spell that, man?
It's Latin. So Dignitas, Dignitas, Humanitae, basically humanity with an A at the end, Institute. It's basically something that he's been brought into leading. It's run out of an ex-monastery in Europe. And it's tied to the Black Nobility, like the current heir to the Habsburg Empire. That bloodline is the head of this thing. You just look at the leading members of this thing. It's tied to the highest echelons of the Black Nobility.
And for the listeners, could you explain real quick what the Black Nobility?
I mean, this is one of many
people are thinking Shaka Zulu at this point. But
sorry, no, they don't get me wrong on the word black. There, it's just it's a term that's been used for a long time to denote the royal families, the higher bloodlines that are tied to the upper echelons of European power that go back a very long time. Like some of these families that usually tend to interbreed, like Queen Elizabeth and her husband are cousins, born from the same hive grandmother. So what you're dealing with is something that goes back a very long time. Some families come, some families go. There's sometimes backstabbing. They're basically united around a certain common view of man made in the image of mud. That ultimately, that's sort of the binding force that organizes their culture, how they transmit their behavior to their children and grandchildren. There's, so when you get an elite Cambridge education, you're not going to be getting the same sort of experience that you get from a community college in Detroit. Or if you're a Rhodes Scholar, you're going to be given a different experience, which will be not quite at the level of what a higher pure, member of a higher family would get to experience, like maybe a Lord Malik Brown. But you'd be still getting something different from, again, community college. So all that to say, this is the older nobility. So this is an organization which, if you go to their website, what do they say that their purpose is? Their purpose is to defend the idea that man is made in the image of God. The Christian potent idea that, firstly, I find very attractive. Like that's what's in my heart. I believe that man is made in the image of God. That's what animated the best of the Renaissance. It's right. What animated the best of every civilization, is this idea that there's something ultimately divine, which is our true nature, and then we have our finite physical nature with its instincts and impulses that we have to harmonize with our higher selves. And that's what real education should be. A real culture should be I think the maturity of your soul, so that your desires, what your impulses are and your instincts are in harmony with what your obligations and your needs are, right? What you should do and what you want to do shouldn't be at odds with each other. They should be brought increasingly into alignment. And that's also in Confucianism too. That's the principle of Confucian thinking, which has made, thankfully, an increasing comeback since the dark days of Mao. So, Confucianism was banned under Mao. That was a complete, shock therapy, deconstruction of the Chinese psyche, and an attempt to try to reconstruct a whole civilization from scratch. It was never going to work. So anyway, this is, I think that's are they genuine, right? Is this organization, the Dignitas Humanitas Institute, very genuine in trying to bring this on? Well, one of the principles of Bannon's version of nationalism that he's tried to extend internationally to bring together other right-wing figures, including figures who have a Nazi affiliation, both in the Golden Dawn case in Greece or in the networks of Italy. They're all being brought together under this idea of an umbrella unification of the global right who defends white Christian. Some of them are racist, some of them are not. But the point is, they're all defending Christian values in opposition to, and it's very anti-China, anti-Islam. There's essentially a view of the clash of civilizations.
Sure, you see that with the identitarians of Europe and stuff like that.
But yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of good people who are being pulled into it. I don't think that everybody is who works with that and is part of that web know what they're a part of. Just like a lot of people who end up working on behalf of George Soros don't know that they're working on behalf of George Soros. They just don't know. They might even have very good ideas and impulses, but they're being brought in and absorbed into something that renders them ultimately impotent and turns them into an instrument for a very destructive will. So now you have a controlled opposition going, unified under certain points that are common, but that ultimately lead you into a false argument. You're wasting your time if you start debating in that world, because in the real world, you got to look at, well, what is George Soros? What is Bannon? What are they afraid of? And it's this idea, like I was citing George Soros's speech in January 2020 of the United States and other so-called Christian societies harmonizing themselves with other civilizations under a higher unifying theme of human beings made as a divine species capable of transcending our limits to growth by and whether you're Jewish or Islamic or Confucian or Hindu or whatever, or there are things in your society's historic experience. There's things in your literature, in your philosophy, where that is being touched upon from your own unique pathway. You'll find examples of that in the Vedas. You'll find it in Confucianism and Mencius. You'll find that in the Quran even. You'll find that in the Bible. And so when people tap into that very human thing, they act a certain way. They judge laws right or wrong a certain way, and they find bases of cooperating with their neighbors, even if their neighbors have a different religion, in a very different and respectful way, right? So, and that's why a lot of these nations in the Middle East that actually were attaining some of this harmony of cultures, like Syria. We saw it in Iraq. We saw it in other cases too, like Iran, where you have Jews and Muslims living very close together without too much ado. There's bigger problems between Iran and Israel than there is between Iran and the Jews living in Iran. So these countries were targeted for destruction because they want to get rid of people's idea that that's possible, that you can actually have a higher self-interest, which is much more human and much more divine than what the empire wants us to get plugged into. So, yeah, I would just say that on that issue.
Now, Matt, real quick, when I started looking at, again, the latest election debacles that are happening here in the United States, and when I started to see Dominion, it's a Canadian company, then I'm starting to see connections to the Clinton Foundation, to Soros, to Bill and Melinda Gates. I'm starting to see the people that came out and started congratulating, the leaders that started congratulating Joe Biden on his epic victory of, running a hard campaign, calling it quits at 10 a.m. and speaking to empty carports and stuff like that. I keep running into one thing, and that is the Crown. Yeah. I keep running into City of London Corporation, and I can't throw a stone without hitting one of these guys, man.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good, because it passes by too many people, and I think it's one of those things where it's like if it's just in front of your face too much, you tend to stop even seeing it. You're like, no, it couldn't be that obvious. I have to look for something else that's less obvious. And yeah, I mean, sometimes it's good to keep yourself, looking behind the surface of things, and it is complex, but sometimes it's not as hard as you think. And yeah, indeed, you're everywhere we look, the City of London and British intelligence is slapping us in the face. And I, like I write in my recent paper, I did a 2-part series. Well, it's a 3-part series. Two parts are published on Dominion, on Smartmatic, on what you just brought up with Lord Malik Brown, who's a character we haven't talked about yet. Since Trump got elected, the evidence of the British hand has been just overwhelming, and we've seen this with whether it's Christopher Steele and his boss, his former boss at MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, and their role in cooking up the dodgy dossier and getting it out to U.S. Media like Mother Jones and other U.S. officials like McCain and others, or their coordination with Oxford Rhodes scholars like the Brookings Institute president, or ex-president Strobe Talbot, who was the president and who worked very closely with these guys, cooking up fictitious material about Trump getting peed on and other things that got the ball rolling on the Muellergate investigations into the Kremlin interference. So you have that. You have Kim Darroch, Sir Kim Darroch, Knight of St. George and St. Michael of the British Empire, who was just knighted for his services recently by the Queen, who was, basically kicked out of the United States as British ambassador because he was caught. I mean, his emails, his messages were made public and hacked, being caught saying, we have to flood Trump's zone with approved British intelligence operatives who could then shape his perception of reality. That was a big embarrassment, or it should have been. The British have a way of spinning embarrassing things into something you should be proud of and be knighted for. But he basically had to leave America for that admission. We have the Integrity Initiative, that British-UK project that's been deployed as well to infiltrate U.S., especially right-wing forces who would be loyal to this coup agenda. Now, under the case of the Dominion and its relationship to Smartmatic through the software that's being used by their systems, which are operational in 30 states, and every single swing state, as I'm sure. I mean, I've been watching your shows, so I know you've been going through this with Harley Schlanger, with other guests, very, very in depth, and that's great that you've been really showcasing that. But yeah, I mean, the Dominion software, which is put there, it's controlled, it's run by Smartmatic, and that was, Yeah, I mean, there's a whole story there. All goes into this. They are indeed a Canadian company that purchased Sequoia. Sequoia was formerly a long-term voting, computerized voting system in the United States that was purchased by Smartmatic in 2005. And that's when the software, the programs, and all these things were embedded with all of their backdoor coding and all of their hackable features. So that never went away. And when Dominion purchased Sequoia in 2010, that stayed. Again, it stayed. And Smartmatic, even on their website, they say that they have no affiliation with Dominion right now. That's what the fact checkers are saying. Well, I'm sorry. No, that's not true at all. Smartmatic, we have an author who wrote an article where he took a picture of from the Wayback Machine on the internet that allows you to go and see what web pages used to be. And indeed, on Smartmatic's own webpage, up until 2015, they were still celebrating having access to something like some huge number. I got it here. It says Smartmatic United States elections. We cover 35 million voters, more than 392,000 electoral devices, 307 jurisdictions in 16 states. I mean, that's just what they're saying. They took that off their website and hope that would like scrub the existence and the evidence. That's not true. But point is, they're definitely enmeshed. And Dominion is run, as you've pointed out, it's a Canadian company. That's a fact. It shares a floor in an office building in Toronto with none other than George Soros's Tides Foundation. That's another thing. I mean, the amount of red alarms that go off here are just crazy. You have their, I think the thing that blew my mind the most was recently discovering that Admiral, what was his name? Peter Neffinger, is it?
Yeah, Neffinger is part of Biden's transition team.
Yeah, my God, I mean, this guy who was the president of Smartmatic, right?
Exactly.
The president of Smartmatic.
And let's not forget one of the executives over at Dominion happens to be in the campaign team for Nancy Pelosi before. So
right, that was her ex-chief of staff.
Her ex-chief of staff, right?
The main lobbyist, right?
Yes.
Oh yeah, and oh my God, it goes on. And then you have the Clinton Foundation aspect of the Delian Project, which is the Clinton Foundation's. It's a George Soros operation that the Clinton Foundation took on to spread democracy building around the world. And the Delian Project is just simply providing high quality voting software and machines to other countries trying to become democracies. And yeah, Dominion brags that they've given, I don't know how much it was, $50,000 or something of support directly to the Delian Project. So you have all of these, and there's so many more things. Now, I mean, even Democrats have made the point. And Sidney Powell did a good job in a recent interview. I've been really, really impressed with her performance. She's the defense attorney for Michael Flynn and has done a remarkable job at proving that Flynn was completely maliciously.
It was a total hit job, man.
Oh, total hit job. Yeah. So she's done a good job defending him, and she's now been brought into Trump's legal team as well. And she just made the point that even Democrats, more honest Democrats, including Elizabeth Warren, Amy Klobuchar, several others have written open letters to Nancy Pelosi in 2019, where they were citing professional computer scientists and experts who had gone through the types of software and machines being used by Dominion as being completely hackable, saying that this invalidates democracy as we know it. So even, this is not something that's purely a partisan conspiracy by the Republicans in any measure. In better times, the Democrats themselves. And frankly, it would be a really very good move at this point, I think, when the U.S. is standing as it is on the verge of a collapse. And this is, as Sidney Powell said, a new American revolutionary moment. People have to accept that. Some of these more honest Democrats should really take this seriously and come out publicly saying what they know and what they think quick. Because it's not about parties at this point. But you have all of these different levels of connection. Now, what we didn't say is I promised you I would talk about Lord Malik Brown.
Yeah.
Because I think that this is where the biggest, we've talked about George Soros and his hand everywhere in this pie. And obviously, he's made a reputation doing color revolutions for a long time. Now it's happening in America. Well, one of Soros's longtime bosom buddies is a guy named Lord Malik Brown, who is really the controller of the holding company that runs Smartmatic. So basically, there's a holding company that its one possession is Smartmatic.
Wow.
Lord Malik Brown is a character who sort of kind of like Maurice Strong, really embodies this upper level management, Davos man, alpha dog wannabe to the extreme. And in 2014, he took control of the holding company that runs Smartmatic. And who is Malik Maurer? Why is he important? Well, Lord Sir Malik Brown, Sir, just like Kim Darroch, Malik Brown is also a knight of the Order of St. George and St. Michael, presided over by Her Majesty the Monarch herself, for services rendered to the Empire in 2009, I think, is when he was inducted. So, okay, this guy is a lifelong... okay, well, let's just look at some of his... He's a former vice chair of the World Economic Forum that Maurice Strong also co-ran, along with Klaus Schwab. He's the former vice president of the World Bank on External Affairs. Where he brags that he converted the World Bank from an authoritarian, impersonal thing to a democratically friendly face.
Oh, yeah.
He's a PR guy. He's a perception manager. He's a social engineer. He ran the UN Development Agency program for 6 years. He basically was a co-architect of the Millennium Development Goals, which were really, in 1999, 2000, it was really just a way to tie in UN funding with George Soros's Open Society Foundations. And you could see that by how Malik Brown approved of the development strategies and the funding during his time when he was working in that position, that he later even went higher and became the undersecretary of the second in command of the United Nations under Kofi Annan in 2005-06. Whenever he was in New York, he always lived at George Soros's estate right there.
Yeah.
When Saakashvili, when the Rose Revolution,
the tie eater.
Yeah, the tie eater, him. Yeah. When the Rose Revolution was being set up by George Soros in 2003, and Saakashvili took power under this kind of it was a technocratic coup on behalf of Soros and who Soros works for. We can get into that. Saakashvili is a corrupt incompetent, and the whole system, Georgia was completely bankrupt. It was ungovernable, and Malik Brown and Soros teamed up, and they basically jointly gave money from the Open Society Foundations and the UN Development Agency's funds that Malik Brown approved in order to pay for Saakashvili and his entire administration, his cabinet, his security forces, his police, that were then all later on used for varieties of things, including the attempted war with Russia that did last. It was a real war.
Yep, 888.
2008,
888,
yeah. Yep, 888, right. And so that almost turned into a global war. If they were part of NATO, as Saakashvili wanted and as Soros and Malik Brown wanted, then that would have been a world war when 1,600 people were killed, and it was mostly Russians who were killed when South Ossetia was fired upon by Saakashvili's Soros-funded forces. Saakashvili later on went on to become the governor of Odessa, the area which had the most rabid neo-Nazi killings after the NED coup in 2014. Yeah. So, Saakashvili, why was he not in Georgia? Well, it's because he was going to go to jail for corruption. And so he had to leave Georgia and escape. And they made him a Ukrainian citizen and gave him the position of governor to protect the Narp and the Azov battalions, It's a joke. And now he's back in Georgia. So all that to say, so Malik Brown, right? He's getting a sense of a little bit of what this guy is. Then he goes on and becomes the co-chair of the Soros's quantum management hedge fund in 2007, where he ends up quitting after a year this super lucrative position in order to become the Minister of External Affairs for the UK government for Africa and Asia. Before that, what is he doing with Soros? This guy is co-founding Soros's International Criminal Court in 1998. Before that, he's co-founding the what's called the International Crisis Group, which is the number one group that produces all of these messed up reports that are being used by governments and other agencies around the world to shape their perception about what's going on in Libya, what's going on in Syria. And they prize themselves for having the most on-the-ground specialists all around the world who can talk to all sides of conflict and generate these anonymous reports, never with a name. So you have things like that happening. This is set up in 1994. Both the ICC, the International Criminal Court, set up with George Soros funding, and this thing, International Crisis Group, again, it's co-founded with George Soros, and even George Soros today is one of the is on the board with George Soros' son, as well as Larry Summers, as well as a guy on the Joe Biden transition team whose name I am simply forgetting right now. But it
Klain.
Was that?
Was it Klain?
No,
Last name Klain?
No, it'll come to me later. It's in my article anyway. So these things are what they're trying to do is they're trying to transplant the use of military planning and the justice system, like having the right of acting out matters of justice from nation states, which are supposed to have that authority, to international bodies that are tied to civil society groups and more, enlightened thinking that are not tied to such local selfish concerns as nation states. So that's always been about. Now, Malik Brown before that ran an operation in the Philippines in 1986 before he even started, I think, working with George Soros to do basically what he's doing now in the USA, where he was brought in. He basically was serving after doing a stint for about 10 years, learning the ropes of British intelligence with the London Economist as a roving reporter. That's usually the way a lot of these guys are trained. They're made a roving reporter to learn the ropes, and they're deployed around different parts of the world, just to like learn the mechanisms of the real corridors of power and how perception management works, through Reuters or Thompson or the London Times. So that's how they're sort of trained on the ground. And then if they show skill and talent like Lord Malik Brown did, he wasn't a lord back then. That came later, or maybe he was. Anyway, then they're brought into higher positions of responsibility. So this is where his time, he was promoted, and he was brought into Sawyer Miller Consulting Firm in 1985, where he was deployed by George Shultz, who was then the Secretary of State, to the Philippines to basically be the controller of the Corazon Aquino presidential race, or her team, who was in the opposition to Ferdinand Marcos, who was, he'd been the president for 20 years in the Philippines. And Corazon Aquino was not doing well at all. She didn't really have a policy. She was, people kind of knew that she was going to be a puppet for the West. Marcos, however, was always a defender of the Philippines. He was always fighting the international financiers since 1965 and fighting for development, fighting for the right for the Philippines to stand economically on their own 2 feet. He actually had something of substance to earn his support from the people. It wasn't like he was just some dictator there for life. It was just, that's the way it was, So when he was brought in to be her speechwriter, Lord Malik Brown was brought in to be Corazon's speechwriter and reshifted the entire focus of her campaign from being one of trying to defend policies, because he's like, you don't really have much to say, so don't do that. Kind of like Joe Biden, right? Like, you don't have that much that's going to inspire people, so don't talk about that. Attack the big orange man. I mean, attack Marcos. He's the Hitler. And just demonize every day, and that's what it became. And it with the help of certain controlled polling agencies, it worked. And so they basically knew that she was probably going to lose, but they had control. And again, Sawyer Miller was just the CIA front. And George Shultz later on bragged in an interview that he did this whole thing behind Reagan's back, and he was proud of it. But basically, Malik Brown gave in an interview, said in an interview years later, that one of his points of pride was shaping the polling sources. When people had voted and they were being polled, who did you vote for? They lied, and that was taken up by the media to project the image that Corazon had won, where in reality she did not. But that was used sufficiently so that he planned a speech for her before the votes were even totally counted. He planned a victory speech, which she gave, tied to this false media propaganda of false polls in everybody's living rooms and the TVs. It stirred up these massive people power movement marches that were then used to overthrow the government, and that ultimately undid Marcos, and then brought in decades of puppet leaders who were beholden to Soros and the Western financial cartels in the Philippines, to the point that even today, Smartmatic has been found to be embedded in the Philippines since 2010, 13, 16 elections in the Philippines. they have been trying to run operations just like they have in the United States to get Corazon Aquino's own son, Benigno Aquino, into the presidency in 2010. That's the reason why President Aquino, who was a big fan of Obama, he's like the Filipino Obama of the Pacific. He was a big fan of like the TPP, the bringing U.S. military into the Philippines on a higher level, and he was into all these things. And he was only put there by Malik Brown, and ironically, again in 2016, Ferdinand Marcos' son, Ferdinand Marcos Jr., was running in a I think it was a senatorial election or a vice presidential election against a Liberal Party candidate who, again, Smartmatic voting machines were used to artificially put votes into his opponent's camp. And for a second time, Malik Brown got rid of Marcos, who should have been an official collaborator with Duterte. Duterte, like Trump in 2016 when he was victorious, it was in opposition. It was in spite of these voting machines. And since then, Duterte has said the Philippines has 3 years to get rid of these voting machines, these Smartmatics, because they're so obviously fraud-based. So you have this, right? Malik Brown is he is one of the biggest pushers of one world government, anti-nation statism, Great Reset. And he was also, as Samantha Powers points out in an interview in 2018, he was one of the major controllers of Barack Obama. He was one of the key leads. And I've got a quote here that I pulled up from an EIR report where Samantha writes saying that the principal conduit between Britain and the candidate Obama has been Lord Malik Brown. This is 2008. The junior foreign minister whom Obama came to admire when Malik Brown was Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. Obama was really taken with him. It's a relationship that has persisted, and they have talked a number of times since. Isn't that nice? Now, Samantha Powers later on becomes, what does she become? She becomes the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, where her entire job is to put into effect the R2P, the responsibility to protect protocols that were brought into the UN by Lord Malik Brown. That was Malik Brown's baby, and his point of biggest success in the United Nations was bringing in R2P as a security doctrine, which simply meant the era of nation states can no longer be tolerated. And when we determine what military interventions occur, we can't respect national boundaries. If crises are happening, we need a supranational body instead to intervene, or a powerful body in for humanitarian wars. And that was basically a defiance of the Nuremberg doctrines, that the Nuremberg codes that were set up in 1948, basically stating that international law would be defined around the absolute illegality of aggressive wars. Right, you couldn't do that until R2P tried to circumvent that. So that was Samantha Powers' job, was to justify the bombing of Libya, humanitarian wars into Syria and beyond. Her husband, Cass Sunstein, is another of these Harvard behaviorists, kind of like Larry Summers, who's, like I said, he was with Strobe Talbot, the Rhodes Scholar, who was also working under Clinton as Undersecretary of State. So Strobe Talbot, Larry Summers, and Al Gore were the major guys who managed the perestroika of the 90s to dismantle the Soviet Union and create these Soros little fake states in all of the Soviet space. Malik Brown that was his key thing. So that's why Larry Summers works with Malik Brown's International Crisis Group. That's why these guys, Cass Sunstein, still works close to Malik Brown. These guys are all behaviorists. Larry Summers is an economic behaviorist. What is this? This is a fascist. This is somebody who believes that mankind is just a bunch of blank slates walking around full of behavior, of impulses that need to be nudged and modified in accordance with order. Who determines the order? Who's ever in power. So Cass Sunstein, when he was working under Obama, he wrote a very, very scary program in 2008 called Conspiracy Theories. It's basically that was the name of the paper, and it's basically, how do you deal with the emergence of the new threat to the world order of conspiracy theories? And you could read this thing. You can Google Cass Sunstein's conspiracy theories or read my paper. I have a link to it, where he points out that the existence of both domestic and foreign conspiracy theories, we suggest, is no trivial matter, but it poses real threats. And he recommends a series of possible responses, of which, top of the list, cognitive infiltration of conspiracy groups by government agents. He writes this down. This is not my words. And then he adds 5 points. And I'm saying this because I'm building up to something. 5 points. Okay, so what does he say that should be done as a solution to the danger of conspiracy theories? He says, number 1, 5 options. A government might ban conspiracy theorizing. I don't think we're necessarily there yet, but you can see what's been happening now. I can see we're going in that direction. Thought crimes, right? Number 2, government might impose some kind of tax, financial or otherwise, on those who disseminate such theories. I don't think we're necessarily doing that, but we are seeing things shut down a lot online that are, offensive to those who don't like conspiracy theories. Number 3, government might itself engage in counter-speech, marshaling arguments to discredit conspiracy theories. Right? Okay, so you have that. Number 4, government might formally hire credible private parties to engage in counter-speech. Fact checkers, right?
Yeah.
The new industry. Number 5, finally, government might engage in informal communication with such parties, encouraging them to help. So, behavioral thought remodification for those who are offenders. There's ways we can help you. That's just extracted directly from his paper. Now, what did I say I was setting up? I was setting up something. Okay, so what's his new job? As of August 24th, 2020, Cass Sunstein was tapped to chair the World Health Organization's Technical Advisory Group, which is essentially, as I write in my paper, it is mandated to help modify people's behavior in compliance with the new norms of the pandemic world order. So a lot of people are questioning whether this pandemic is what we're being told it is by the World Health Organization, and that's not safe. That so many people are questioning things. That's really a international security. So how do we find different techniques to modify people's thinking and perceptions to the truth that we say exists? That's his new job, right? So you got this thing. I would just say, beyond all of this, somebody might listen to what I just said and think, okay, you said stuff about the British, but really, I see the thread here. The thread is George Soros. It's a George Soros conspiracy. That's the problem. No. If you actually look at George Soros, the guy's a money manager, but he really wasn't a high-level operator until 1992, where he came really onto the superstar scene of finance when he made $1 billion speculating against the British pound sterling.
Yep.
Why is this interesting? Would this even maybe say that I'm wrong, that this proves that he actually doesn't like the British Empire? Well, no. The British Empire is not the British government. It is not in any way. So what he did certainly hurt British people a lot. When you speculate into currency, sort of currency, yeah, it hurts people a lot. A lot of people lose work. That's not the British Empire. It's different from the British government. I'd say even a lot of people in the British government don't like the British Empire. It's different. At that same time, that was a period of the transition to the unipolar order and the creation of the finalization of the Maastricht treaties that Margaret Thatcher co-organized with Mitterrand and Bush Sr., along with different forces behind them. But that was always based on the creation of the euro, of the European Union. But the euro, as we know it, is one basket that would be a central bankers controlled cage, where no nation would ever again be allowed to have access to their own credit controls, currency capital controls, credit emissions, national banking. Those things would be forever banned if you were a part of the euro. You'd have no flexibility. So they created a cage for European nations to walk into. Now, would the person setting the trap want to walk into their own trap? No. So what would be a good excuse? Well, we're in an economic crisis. We can't possibly do this right now, maybe later. So George Soros sort of gave Britain its good excuse to not jump into the euro the way, that's why Britain still has the pound, so that they would have some more independent flexibility so that they could manage things from above a little bit more. through the City of London. Who was George Soros before that? He was a speculator. He was a money maker, but he really just got his start in 1968 when Evelyn Rothschild gave him startup capital. Evelyn Rothschild gave him startup capital to create the quantum hedge fund.
Yeah.
And in the epoch of the unbounded markets, the consumer society unveiling of the post-1971 system, yeah, people like him were told, go rape, go make money. The sky is yours, right? It was the age of the pirates. Mm-hmm. And people made a lot of obscene money fast and easy, and it got easier the more bank deregulation unfolded. Glass-Steagall was taken down. Other things were taken down. Derivatives were normalized, right, in 1987. They were again deregulated in 2001. That became the economy increasingly. So the small cancer became more than the tissue of the healthy patient, the economy, the actual nations themselves. So Soros, that was his job, just be part of the problem, be part of one of these pirates. But it was, before that, he wasn't much of anything. He was just a little sociopath who was talent searched in the London School of Economics under the guidance of Karl Popper. Before that, he was, a kid who was induced to become a survivalist, trying to act like he's a German when he was, because his dad faked him papers during the Nazi occupation of Hungary, and he started working for the Germans, helping to confiscate Jewish property as the Jews were all marshaled into concentration camps and killed. And this is an experience that he says was the best of his life, the most exciting, formative experience of his entire life was this. So they of course they saw talent there. Of course they gave him privileges and they gave him responsibilities, but he's always been beholden to something else. Now, does that mean that the British Empire is just a Rothschild empire? Is that what I'm saying? Some people might say that because, look, Evelyn Rothschild is part of a Rothschild dynasty that's been around for a long time. Is that what this is? No, it's not what that is, because you have to ask, well, did the empire pre-exist the Rothschild dynasty? Yes, it did. Yes, it did. The Rothschild dynasty itself was brought in, as far as I know, Amschel Rothschild was like a coin dealer, a bit of a nobody, a money man. On a very low order in the early 1700s. And by the 1740s, 50s, he was brought in and promoted, much like George Soros was, because he had certain skill sets, certain disengagements with his conscience, and was effective at doing what he did. So he was given more and more privileges and was so effective that even his, a certain little local dynasty was granted to him, protections for your kids, rights to be brought in, for your family to be brought into one of the higher families, as long as they obey certain guidelines. But before the Rothschilds, there was still a British Empire. There was still the City of London. But is the City of London the problem? Here's where it gets really interesting. V, sorry. This is where it gets interesting, because you could ask, is the British Empire and the City of London really the British Empire? Yes and no. Because did the oligarchy pre-exist the British Empire?
Yes.
Hell yes. And so even there, the 1688 Glorious Revolution, this is a paper I'm publishing. It should be up next week on the art of political lying. But even that, there were Republican networks in Britain, for Christ's sakes, in the 1680s, 90s, and even into the reign of Queen Anne. There's a wonderful book that I've been using called the How the Nation Was Won by Graham Lowry. People should just buy that on Amazon and study it. But there were Republican networks coordinating with circles who were working directly with a young Benjamin Franklin in the early 18th century. Cotton Mather, the Winthrop family, they were coordinating closely with these circles of Britain in the 1680s and 90s, who were trying to stop this takeover of Britain, because Britain was walking two worlds. It wasn't yet a global empire. There was no City of London financial parasite the way we know it today, at least. There was at least no Bank of England, that's for sure. There was a City of London, but it wasn't the same thing that we know of today, and there was no Bank of England as a private central bank. That didn't exist. Instead, you had people like Robert Harley, the guy who became the Prime Minister of England, who was an enemy of John Churchill. John Churchill was the Lord Marlborough, who was the main lead guy. He's the as the name implies, yes, he was the great grandfather of Sir Winston Churchill. Yes, and his family is, again, just like the Rothschilds, sort of awarded for doing good service to the empire. They were given a special education, special protocols to follow, to be part of the upper nobility, but not too high up. You'll still find as a Rothschild or as a Churchill, there's still a glass ceiling that you bump your head against if you try to marry a little bit too high up. But that's another thing. But they wanted to take a puppet king from Amsterdam, which had then been reconquered through the private central bank of Amsterdam in 1609, as part of a Venetian takeover, because Venice was formerly the center of world power, financially, militarily, intelligence apparatus wise. Everyone knew that Venice was the center of the beast. That was much more common knowledge than people realize, which is why Shakespeare places Othello in Venice and places Iago as the prototypical Venetian spy master and social engineer who's able to get his enemies to self-destruct by profiling them and amplifying their weaknesses so that they follow on prejudices or assumptions that are not true, but that destroy themselves because they didn't come to really organize their internal soul properly. They have vices, they have jealousies, they have other things. That's how nation states are set at each other's throats, like Armenia and Azerbaijan today. They have everything to gain by working together. So Iago, read Shakespeare, study it. Like, I really challenge people who are listening to do that, or read The Merchant of Venice. If you want to get a sense of what Shakespeare is helping to educate both the leadership of his society as well as the masses to understand about the real nature of political evil and human psychology. And that's what inoculates us to falling into a lot of these traps that are being set for us by the Steve Bannon operation, through the higher nobility of Dignitas Humanitae or Soros. So these were forces who were, again, people should go to my website if they want to. There's more material that's on this stuff, but read Graham Lowry's book. These were the forces in 1688, 90, when the Glorious Revolution was happening, and this puppet king from Amsterdam was being put in as a puppet king of England, who couldn't even speak English. And just a few years later, by 1694, you have the creation of the Bank of England, as new wars with France are started. Unnecessary, endless wars are created by Lord Churchill, who he becomes the head of the militaries of all of the militaries of England, and he's just working with his colleagues in the French aristocracy, right? Enemies of peace in France, and it's kind of like the deep state. Think of it that way. You have the deep state of France, the deep state of England, and they're working together to get these wars going. And who's going to finance it? Well, the treasury is empty; it's bankrupt. So who's going to finance it? The Bank of England. And they create a new system. They pass a law that creates the Bank of England, and it's all premised around tally sticks, where you could just create more debts to fund the wars. And opponents, humanists, Republicans like Robert Harley, Jonathan Swift, the great satirist, is actually brought in as a political advisor, kind of like a Roger Stone character, but on a higher level, to work with Harley and others to fight back against it. And they try to create a national land bank of England in 1796 in opposition to the Bank of England, to create a bank that would, and you could read the legislation for this thing and their writings and thinking. It was all designed to provide national credit for infrastructure, manufacturing, build schools, build the colonies up, like help the colonies, the 13 colonies develop infrastructure. It was glorious. It was a good idea. And they were all working towards peace negotiations with France, which they finally achieved. And so that was short-lived and undermined when when Queen Anne died. And the Churchills took over with that whole thing. But the Rothschilds just come later. There's no Rothschild conspiracy as such. There's no Soros conspiracy as such. And I would say that there's not even a British conspiracy in that sense either, when you look at it from this standpoint of universal history, because it's not, you have to at a certain point take a step back and realize, okay, I could keep peeling back the layers on the timeline of the onion and go to Venice and the Venetian power that took over the Byzantine Empire and managed the raiding of
the Babylonian bankers of Venice, man.
Yeah, you could go there too. Right? People say, "Oh, it's a Jewish conspiracy." Well, did this oligarchy pre-exist Judaism? Hell yes. So, okay, so you're dealing now. You could always go further back.
You can go further back. Ancient Egyptians, go back to the Sumerians. Even the first concept of the central bank was a Sumerian concept. Before the Riksbank in Sweden came to be in 1364. It goes way back. This is an ancient conspiracy. It really is.
Yeah, and it's epistemological warfare. Like, if you really want to get a sense of, because here, the reason why people have trouble with this oftentimes is that they tend to try to find the mechanisms. It turns almost into a fetish.
Yeah,
Like,
correct.
you like chess. You like building train sets. I like conspiracy theories.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
so, but see, so it's not really about the mechanisms or the players or the parts. It's about how you're thinking. Because human beings, look, straight up, human beings are the only species that we know of so far that can organize our entire existence as a species. Our character is not located in purely our instincts for survival or these things on that lower genetic order. It's not just adapting to environments that gives rise to creative innovation. That's not really what defines us. It is our ability to think about thinking. So it's not just thinking. Anyone can think, right? But it's being aware that you're thinking and being aware of the assumptions, the core, because everybody has to have assumptions. You can't know everything. And so by virtue of the fact that you don't know everything, Jordan Peterson does this nicely. I think he's a very good communicator at some of these concepts. You have to have certain assumptions of things in your worldview, in your paradigm, right? Just to navigate through the world. But some of those core assumptions, which affect everything else, like branches on a tree, right? It's like the roots that affect all the branches, might not be right. They might be right. They might be right opinions, but they might not be knowledge. And they might seem like right opinions, but like Socrates says, they might be wind eggs. They might just have the appearance of reality, but they're actually, when you poke them, there's nothing in the egg. It's just a shell, right?
Exactly.
But you have to examine them. You have to put them to the test, right? See if paradoxes are created by virtue of holding the assumption that you have. Let's say that, I believe that mankind is obviously a monkey, that the only thing separating us is our thumbs and our slightly enlarged prefrontal cortex. That's really what defines us as humans. It's like, yeah, okay, but if that's true, let's test it. How many species do we see of monkeys that can grow in nature? Okay, well, there's a certain limit that we see in nature, and that, whenever nature goes into a drought, the species collapse. That's just what happens. They grow and they thrive to the degree that there is abundance, but they're not, and they might even have little innovations. Monkeys can come up with little innovative ways to use a stick to hit a fruit,
an insect mound or something.
Yeah, you could do that. But their entire species character doesn't really qualitatively change over the long period. There's a real upper limit, because they're not changing their way of thinking and transmitting that in the form of metaphors to other minds that transcend their limited, finite individual existence. So human beings, we do that. We could choose to do that, because it's all about free will. We could choose not to. And there's a figure who I know Harley talks about a lot. There's a figure who goes deep into this, a contemporary figure who recently passed away, named Lyndon LaRouche. And I recommend that people Google LaRouche's name and read some of his writings, his thicker 20, 30-page papers, which are all over they're easy enough to find, but they have this deep epistemology. And that's really how you're going to start understanding empire per se versus this higher... Huh?
Versus a soundbite you could hear, on various talking heads and this, that, and the other. You want to really get a grasp of it. Yeah, LaRouche is a great source, man.
Oh yeah. The mode of thinking that's being presented is a really challenging and there's a lot of a lot of payback to it. But the idea that human beings both increase qualitatively and quantitatively whenever we transmit and apply correct ideas that are based upon real discoveries of nature, the invisible organizing principles of nature, to our fellow men and women, our species flourishes. We have these spikes of population growth to the point that we're almost, we're 8 billion, going to be 9 billion people on the earth so far. And we're just beginning to become a space-based economy, utilizing the power and the geometry of the atom and the immense power locked up inside of that small universe of the atom. That can, there's infinite that we can discover on that domain, and there's infinite we can discover on the macro domain, in terms of just exciting discoveries that both benefit our quest for curiosity, but also that have payback for our ability to stave off an asteroid threat. Every discovery gives us a greater power to also have practical effects and freedoms. So we can have more people at a higher quality of life. We don't have to just expect to die, at 30 years of age, under an underdeveloped, underpopulated tribal society like we used to. we can expect to live longer. And why not in some years' time, maybe after we're dead, why would it be impossible to imagine people living to 200 or longer with new discoveries applied, wisely? So it's all about how you're thinking. And if you're approaching it bottom up, just bottom up, you're never going to come to what I just said. Like, it won't be something you can access. You'll always be peeling back the onion ever more, and usually falling onto misinformation that derails your search at some point. That's why there's so much misinfo littering the ecosystem, the alternative media ecosystem right now, ranging from, Jesus, you got things like Steve Pietzenuk, right? This high-level Kissinger CFR guy who writes fiction novels with Tom Clancy, who I think is a pretty high-level controller of the whole QAnon thing. Just the way he composes his narratives and the way he's been able to deconstruct Alex Jones, since he was the guy who brought in the whole narrative on Sandy Hook. Yeah, Sandy Hook.
Sandy Hook.
Yeah, that's the thing that sabotaged Alex Jones, and since then Alex Jones was deconstructed and reconstructed as this flaky weird guy, who still loves Steve Pietzenuk as his guru. So there's things like that that's just littered everywhere, and so you have to develop your smell for this when you navigate through the minefield of things, and ultimately keep in mind that a unipolar world is a bad idea. It's premised on very old, false ideas of what human beings are and what the universe is and what God is. And like Verdi's approach to Othello, people should listen if they want to get a good the psychological outline of the oligarchy of the empire. Look at these. Some of these artists are really on point. They're humanists. They're actually, like, Verdi himself was a senator. He was a politician who was fighting for the soul of Italy. But look at how he treats Iago and Iago's solo aria on Me Deo Credo, my credo of what is it called? My credo of an evil god. And you can Google that on YouTube. It's really that, like, the oligarchy. They believe in God. They just believe that God, and that they believe ultimately that we're made in His image, just like I do, and I think you do, and other humanists who love humanity do. But they ultimately believe on that higher level that it's an evil universe and an evil creator, and that we're made in the image of an evil creator, and they have to stifle their weak human sentiments in order to bring about their natural way of being, whether it's through, of course, you see pedophilia rings that are part of the upper echelons of fetishes and stuff. It's part of their dehumanization process. They have to do these things.
Yeah. It really is, man. Matt, we have about 5 minutes left, man. Actually, 3 minutes left. Go ahead and you can close out your closing comments, as well as social media and how people can follow you and your work and where it's published.
Yeah, sure. Well, they're welcome to visit the CanadianPatriot.org. It's just CanadianPatriot.org, O-R-G, for some of the daily updates and also thicker writings on history. It's not just Canadian history. Don't let the name deceive you. And then there's also the Rising Tide Foundation. So it's risingtidefoundation.net. That is a nonprofit organization I co-created with my wife, Cynthia Chung, who's also a co-author with me at Strategic Culture. And there's a lot there. We actually do weekly lectures, sometimes twice a week, touching on a lot of topics. So we're encouraging people to sign up, be part of the dialogue, develop. Now is the time. Like Sidney Powell said, we are in a new revolutionary moment. And it is a make or break it thing, because if Biden does come in, I'm not saying that there's no hope, but you're gonna you're ushering in a dark age way of thinking, and a lot of opportunities that might not be there for a very long time are going to disappear. So people have to really, really think seriously about their personal relationship to the process that they're a part of. It's subjective. It's not we're not watching things on TV as viewers in a stadium here. We're part of it. We're not watching the gladiator match. We're there on the arena, and there's lions. They're hungry.
Exactly.
So, people have to think about their identities, what's organizing and animating your identities, your passions, which passions are holding you back, which instincts. Some people, we're good people, but a lot of people, just by virtue of having been born into and lived in this system throughout your life, there's things that are holding you back. You could evaluate what those are and think, well, what's stopping me from being that higher person I need to become for the sake of my children, my nation, and humanity. As a communicator, as a learner, as a teacher, and obviously in the United States, there's things that you can do that I can't do here in Canada. get out there. I mean, there's you have to support right now the cause of exposing the steal that's happening, and really really get active.
Very well said. Mathew Ehret, thank you so much for joining us, folks. Again, subscribe, like, comment, and share, and follow Mathew's work. The links are in the description box. Reach out to Mathew with any of the questions you might have. And with that being said, thank you all for listening in. We are over and out.